You ever think about what it means to come home from a war and feel like you don't belong? That's what it was like for a lot of us who came back from Vietnam in the 1960s. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll talk about the 70s, 80s, and all that in future videos, but today I want to stay right here in the 60s. That's when everything changed. That's when the world we left behind stopped looking anything like the one we came back to. Let me set the stage a little. The early 60s, man, that still felt like old school America. Elvis was still on the radio. High school kids were getting their hair greased up, driving muscle cars. Kennedy was in the White House talking about a new frontier. You had this real sense of American pride, like we were the good guys, no questions asked. Then came that draft notice. You'd open the mailbox and see that letter from Uncle Sam. Your stomach dropped. Greetings, it would say. That was it. You were going to war. You didn't have much of a choice. And let me be clear, most of us didn't run from it. Not because we were gung-ho warriors, but because that's just what you did. You answered the call. Now, some volunteered, maybe their dad served in Korea or World War II, maybe they believed in fighting communism. And yes, some guys joined just to avoid worse odds from the draft board. But whether you signed up or got that letter, it didn't really matter once your boots hit the ground in Vietnam. We all ended up in the same mud. The war, different than anything you'd imagine. Vietnam wasn't like any war Americans had seen before. I mean, we didn't even understand what we were stepping into. Jungle fighting, guerrilla warfare, landmines, booby traps, monsoons that soaked you to the bone. You couldn't trust the villages. You didn't know who the enemy was. One minute you were handing out candy to a kid. The next, that same village could be hiding Viet Cong. We weren't winning hearts and minds. We were just trying to stay alive. The days blurred together, hot, humid, sticky. You'd go out on patrol not knowing if you'd come back. Every sound could be a warning. You slept with one eye open and sometimes not at all. And if you were lucky enough to write a letter home, you probably didn't say half of what you were really seeing. No one would have believed it anyway. And then you hear about what's going on back home. Now imagine this. You're in the jungle fighting to stay alive, and you start hearing stuff about home. Protesters in the streets, people burning their draft cards, some even waving North Vietnamese flags. You're reading articles about college kids calling soldiers murderers. Some of us thought that can't be right. That's got to be overblown. But it wasn't. America was shifting, and not in ways we expected. The civil rights movement was exploding. Cities were rioting. Kennedy got assassinated. Then Malcolm X, then Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy too. The world we knew was crumbling while we were halfway across it, trying to survive in a jungle where every shadow could kill you. We were over there thinking we were doing our duty, fighting communism, protecting freedom, and our own country was questioning the whole thing, not just the politics, us. The flight home, not what you'd expect. Now let's fast forward. You do your tour, you survive. Maybe you get a Purple Heart, maybe you lose friends, maybe you lose a piece of yourself out there. And then one day, just like that, you're flying home. No real transition. You go from battle-hardened soldier to civilian in about 24 hours. There's no warm welcome, no parades, no thank you for your service. In fact, most of us tried not to wear our uniforms on the way home. I know guys who were told by airline staff to change out of their fatigues so they wouldn't get harassed in the airport. Can you imagine that? You step off the plane onto American soil, and instead of being greeted with open arms, people turn their heads. Some sneer, some say stuff under their breath, others outright call you a baby killer. Not all of them, of course, but enough to make you want to stay quiet about what you'd been through. No one talks about it Back then, nobody really talked about trauma. PTSD wasn't even a term most people knew. If you were having nightmares, if you were drinking too much, if you couldn't hold down a job or stay in one place, people just thought you were broken, weak. Some even said you were dangerous. You didn't go around telling people you were a Vietnam vet. That wasn't something you wore like a badge. It was more like a scar you tried to keep hidden. You'd go to job interviews and leave the military part off your resume if you could. You'd go on dates and avoid bringing it up. Because if people knew where you'd been, they looked at you different. And after a while, you just stopped talking about it, even to your family, even to yourself. The silence between brothers. Now, I'll say this. One of the only things that helped was talking to other vets. Guys who'd been there. You didn't have to explain it. You could just nod, share a beer, sit in silence. That kind of silence meant more than 1,000 words from anyone else. But even then, we didn't go into detail. We kept it light, surface level, because the deep stuff, that was hard to touch. Some of us just weren't ready, and some never would be. The hippie generation and the divide. Let me tell you something about the 60s that doesn't always come through in history books. America was divided before social media ever existed. And I'm not talking about political disagreements. I'm talking about people yelling in each other's faces in the streets. Friends and families torn apart by war, race, and ideology. You had the counterculture movement. Hippies, draft dodgers, anti-war protesters, and they were loud, marching in Washington, burning flags, blocking military convoys. Now, I get it, I really do. Some of them were against the war, not the soldier. But at the time, it didn't feel that way. You come home from hell and someone tells you you're the villain. That's not something you forget easily. Trying to fit back into normal life. So what did we do? We tried to fit back in, got jobs, went back to school if we could. Some got married, some had kids. But the thing was, nothing felt normal. You're sitting in a college lecture and can't relate to anyone around you. You're in line at a diner and some kid in a tie-dye shirt is mocking the war. You try to sleep and all you can hear are helicopters and gunfire in your head. People expected you to just move on, like flipping a switch. You're home now, it's over. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. And the hardest part, you felt like a stranger in your own country, a ghost walking around a world that didn't understand or even want to understand what you'd been through. No real support system. There weren't vet centers on every corner. There weren't hotlines or support groups or trauma counselors like there are today. The VA was overloaded, underfunded, and overwhelmed. If you went to them for help in the 60s, you'd get stuck in red tape or handed a bottle of pills and told to deal with it. So a lot of us suffered in silence. Some got angry. Some self-medicated, some couldn't take it anymore. It was a rough time to be a vet, a lonely time. And when you look back on the 60s, when everyone else is talking about flower power and Woodstock and the moon landing, we remember it a little differently, a different kind of service. You know, I've thought a lot about this over the years, about what it meant to serve during Vietnam in the 60s. We didn't get medals and parades. We didn't get gratitude or support, but we served anyway. And that kind of service, it's different. It's quieter. It's heavier. It's the kind you carry with you every day, not because anyone reminds you, but because you lived it. And when people say thank you for your service now, decades later, hey, that's appreciated. Don't get me wrong, but it took a long, long time to hear those words. Too long for some of our brothers who never made it back or never lived long enough to hear them. Final thoughts. So yeah, being a Vietnam vet in the 60s, it wasn't easy. You went from the chaos of the jungle to the chaos of a country that didn't know what to do with you. You weren't seen as a hero. Sometimes you weren't seen at all.